What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another video of Swayze Talks Magic. It's what I'm calling it for now. This is basically a mini podcast. We just started doing this last week. This will be our second time doing this, where we just discuss topics around Magic Arena. And, think of it like a mini podcast where I just share my thoughts on certain things. Today, in particular, we're talking about Best of One Arena and the top 5 most played, or the top 5 best decks in Standard as of right now, where it stands in the metagame. But if you guys are watching this and you're not a member of the channel, I just want to let you know these videos do come out a week early for members only. So if you guys want to become a member to get this kind of content a little bit earlier, you can do that, and it would help support the channel, and I'd greatly appreciate that. But yeah, so if you're interested in that kind of stuff, be sure to hit that members join button. But today, we're talking Standard Best of One, and we're talking about the 5 best or most played meta decks in Standard, and we're getting all of our information from ontapped.gg. Let's talk about it. For starters, let's talk about the website a little bit here. So this is a pretty cool website that gives you a ton of information around Magic Arena. We got drop downs here where we choose Standard, Best of One, and then basically it's Bronze through Mythic. It shows us all of the data compiled for the most percentages usage of these deck lists, and they categorize them by certain deck names, like mono red aggro, as you can see, is number 1, which we'll jump into. But before we do that, we've got individuals over here and how they're doing really well on their higher percentages. We got win rates today, and so it has a lot of information that's really good, especially for newer players. If you want to try to figure out how to build a deck, you can just kind of look here. Or if you're trying to battle the meta game constantly like me, this is a really good way to show you what you're probably going to end up running into. So first up on the list, we've got mono red aggro, and I know a lot of you guys just let out a big sigh. I know mono red aggro, if you're new to Magic, is kind of a meme. A lot of people don't like it, just simply for the fact that it's got very simple play lines, where it's a lot of just turn them sideways and attack in, not a lot of strategy built into it. But it is still a very good deck for new players. Typically that's pretty cheap for the most part. There's obviously different versions of mono red, but it's usually cheaper when it comes to wild cards, and it's a little bit easier to play. So it's very popular, and it's also very, very fast games. Typically they want to end the game really fast, so you're in and out really quickly trying to get up the rank ladder quick. So as you can see, there's 103 deck lists, mono red versions, and over 300,000 matches played. Now it's got an average of a 58% win rate, which is really, really good. And let's just take a look at the top one here. Kind of break down the deck list for us. All right, so this is what we're looking at when we're looking at mono red right now. So the mono red matchup right now is looking actually a little bit different than it did a couple of months ago before Foundations. It used to be more of, pump your creatures as high as you could possibly take them, and maybe even fling them into the opponent's face for the win, with like Heartfire Hero and stuff like that. But it looks like it's kind of developed into something completely different now, into a more classical mono red, where you turn them sideways and attack in, and then you just throw fireballs at the opponent's face with things like Shock and Lightning Strike. And in my opinion, this new strategy, it's kind of harder to deal with. With creatures that were able to be pumped up and then flung at your opponent. And by the way, that was all because of the ley line. The red ley line we had that got banned recently, really, when it got banned, it forced the red players, in my opinion, to make that shift, to go back to burn. And it gives them a lot more options here, in my opinion, because we got Screaming Nemesis now, right? You can self-burn your Nemesis, which can stop life gain on opponents, which can shut down some decks altogether. But the ability to get in, and then maybe you get swept off the field, right? Let's say an opponent drops down like a temporary lockdown. Typically, the red players are pretty much screwed because they got to find another creature to attach that pump spell, like Monstrous Rage to, right? And then they just got to be lucky enough to top deck it. And it's just very difficult for them to close out games when that stuff happens. In this case, you're drawing into Lightning Strikes, and you're drawing into Shocks, which could just be that last little bit of damage you need to end the game. But yeah, mono red is always going to be good. In my opinion, it's, very good for Best of One, obviously. You're trying to get fast games. You're trying to get in and out of the arena quickly, just to get as much rank up as you can, as fast as you can, to get to Mythic, get your prizes, your events, whatever you got to do. But this is a really good deck to do it. I know you hate it. I know I hate it. It's annoying to deal with, and especially in Best of One, because Best of One is a lot of whoever goes first is at a massive advantage. And if you're mono red, that advantage skyrockets. So it's tough, but it's a good deck, and I get why people play it. So That makes your list at number 1. We'll jump into number 2 now. All right, number 2, we've got mono black mid-range. Now we're talking. All right, mono black mid-range with an average win rate of 56% and same amount of matches and 137 deck lists. Okay, so mono black mid-range. Let's find somebody here with a higher win rate. Actually, it looks like these top ones here all have pretty high win rates. Wow. Yeah, and it doesn't surprise me with mono black mid-range having a high win rate when your whole identity a lot of the times as mono black is having a lot of removal, which means that you kind of feed on those mono red players. Not to mention mono black right now, the card I want to attribute its success to is this one right here, Unholy Annex. If you guys didn't see my video last week, Unholy Annex made it in my top 5 cards in all of Standard right now because of its ability to gain you life while you're drawing cards. That against mono red can be game ending detrimental. You know what I mean? Like, this card is insane. It starts out bad, obviously, by having to draw a card and drain yourself, but most of the time you're going to be able to get down like a Bloodletter of Aclazotz or this dross down early enough to where you can start gaining life right away on turn 4. And then after that, if they, somehow deal with these two things, you can just create your own demon off the back end of the ritual chamber, and it's, right back to gaining life, which is pretty cool. Now, Mishra's Foundry is cool, but there is a land. I forget the name of the land. It's newer, but there's a land that's all creature types and becomes a 3/3. I think this deck absolutely needs that in its build because it's another way to kind of versatile, that demon into play where you can start draining the opponent's life. But I do think the Annex generating a ton of value for the opponent by drawing cards every turn, and even on the turn that it comes down, is too good. And I think that's really what powers this deck. And on top of that, if you play things like Liliana to force a discard every single turn, and then you're just drawing cards to replenish that, the opponent's going to fall behind really fast. And then not to mention, you can hit their hand with a Deep Cavern Bat as well. But yeah, mono black right now, always going to be a good deck to kind of play. Again, black has the most amount of removal. Doesn't seem like they run a boatload of removal, but they run really good removal. They run a full play set of cut downs for Heartfire Heroes and mono red players. Looks like they've got Anoint with Affliction because, again, you want to exile the Heartfire Hero because you don't want that damage coming back to you. Shieldred's Edict and Nowhere to Run. So I guess there is actually more removal than I thought here. There's just a lot of 2-ofs, giving them a ton of options. Nowhere to Run's interesting because it can obviously shut down the ward effect on a creature that maybe just got, sheltered by ghosts or whatever. So that's a nice little pick there too. But Duress, by the way, becoming a lot more popular, and most of the time it's going to find a target to hit unless it's a pure creature deck, which is really, really rare. But this deck right here, in my opinion, probably my favorite one out of all the top 5. Out of all the ones to play, this is the one I would play. I think it's probably the most consistent in my opinion. It's got more favorable matchups in my opinion. It's just a little bit more well-rounded and not a one-trick pony. You know what I mean? So add in that creature land, by the way, though, that I'm talking about, and I think you'll see more success. But this was number 2, and it's, in my opinion, my favorite of the 5. Up next, we've got Boros Auras. This is still kicking, huh? All right, we got a 57% win rate, 200,000 matches played, 114 decks. Okay, so not as many matches played, 100,000 or less, but that's okay. Wow, look at these percentages. Holy cow, this deck is smashing, dude. Holy cow, 58% win rates. Let's see what's going on here. So, we've got some new tech in this deck that I actually haven't seen that too much, but Atali's Favor. Wow, I like this card a lot. Atali's Favor. It's interesting to see Boros players starting to throw this card into their builds because it's such good value, man. It comes down, it obviously pumps your creature, and it's an aura, which triggers things like your Scavenger to get 1/1 counters on your creatures, which helps with the aggroing effects. But its ability to just come in and immediately discover 3 is so good, especially when your whole deck list is 2 or under. And imagine if you had like a Scavenger down and Atali's Favored it and you got a Sheltered by Ghost that you needed, at a very clutch moment to finish the game. Or, flying over the top, you catch one of these off the top. That's also so good. You can also draw a card when it hits a creature. Super good. But here's the problem that I have with this deck. The same thing I sort of had with the mono red pump deck before. If this becomes a deck list that's, very much being played, let's say it jumps to number 1 and it's all over the arena, right? It's not that difficult to deal with because all you got to do is shut down their 1 or 2 creatures in their opening hand with, let's say, like a cut down, right? With mono black, right? You can hit it with a cut down. The moment they try to, pump it up with something like a ruckus or something, you throw it down a Scavenger and then you try to ruckus it next turn, boom, it dies to a cut down or whatever. Go for the throat. And when you kill it, they just lost value not only in that creature, but a lot of these enchantments and auras they're placing on their creatures are also drawing them cards, whether they leave the battlefield, enter the battlefield, whatever. And they're losing that value right away, which is obviously why they run things like the rescue. This card right here drives me insane. This card right here is the only reason, in my opinion, that I think that this deck can be 100% playable as a Boros deck, because this card is the new like Tameo safekeeping, or like, you know, Snakeskin Veil, but in white. This thing giving the indestructible and hexproof, or is it just hexproof? Is it just hexproof? It's just hexproof. Either way, good enough to basically not allow your creature to get targeted at instant speed is just so good. And it counts as an aura, which pumps everything up with the scavenger. It's just so good, man. I love this card. But if you hit their creature and they don't have a rescue in their hand, they're usually pretty, you know, out of luck there, because they're gonna have to try to fish out another creature, and that's difficult to do when half your deck is auras. So it's a little bit less. In my opinion, a little bit less well-rounded than the mono red, and I get why it's being played less, but the win rates, you know, say otherwise. And in my opinion, I think the win rates are probably a little higher with this deck because of the fact that mono red exists, and you have things like Sheltered by Ghosts. Because if you get the mono red matchup and you Sheltered by Ghosts one of your creatures, you're gonna get a ton of life gain, and not to mention you can put it onto a creature and then stack its power with the Scavenger, Armor, Monstrous Rage, and you're gonna gain so much life that mono red can't deal with it. But yeah, I'd rather play this over mono red for sure. But yeah, it's I can't believe how high the win rates are. That's crazy. This deck is still really thriving. So if you want to play something good, it looks like Boros might be the answer for some fast, easy games that are very high win rate. So good for Boros, I guess. That's unfortunate for us. All right, on to the next one. And that's kind of crazy because I thought Boros was kind of dying out there, but apparently not. It's at 6% of the play rate. That's crazy. All right, now a deck list that I've actually been seeing a lot of, and when I say a lot of, I mean different versions of this deck, is number 4, Dimir midrange. This is 5% of the meta, which is crazy because I feel like a lot more than most of these other decks. But there are different versions of this deck. Let me see what they've got here as far as, well, let's talk about the percentages real quick. We're at 52%, so not as good as Boros, but also less matches played. 53 deck lists. So this is interesting. So yeah, these are the two types of deck lists I'm talking about. So we've got things like with the Otter and our discarding effects of Hopeless Nightmare. And then we've got, you know, bounce effects back to our hand with Fear of Isolation, and This Town Ain't Big Enough. So we have this type of an Dimir midrange deck that I think personally is a little bit better right now, because it's basically Esper Pixies, but cutting out the white. And then you've got this other Dimir midrange deck right here, which we'll look at first. This one is trying to get their damage through, obviously, and draw cards off of Enduring Curiosity. So we've got a lot of mid-range type creatures that, you know, add some sort of benefit when they hit the field. We've got the Siren, you know, pumps everything up with map tokens. You got Mastermind, and the Siren and the Mastermind both being flying is what is trying to get onto the battlefield by turn 2, because you want to try to get a Kaito on 3. When you attack in, Kaito wants to ninjutsu into the battlefield. It can only do that if your creature's elusive, which is why we got a bunch of flyers early on. And Deep Cavern Bat, obviously being able to hit the hand is so nice, because you can search out something, you know, that would otherwise disrupt that play line, and then you go with the Kaito after that. And once Kaito's on the field, it's pretty hard to deal with, because, I mean, there's just so much, you know, diversity in this deck with removal spells, counter spells, creatures. You've got a lot of things you're constantly having to worry about and answer, and it's impossible to worry about them all and answer them all unless you're doing your own thing at a very high rate. Like mono red getting underneath this quickly would be pretty good. Then you got Unstoppable Slasher, which is pretty surprising. I don't think I've seen anyone running this in a Dimir midrange deck before, but looks like they've got 3 copies here on this one, and this card's pretty dangerous. Typically, it's paired with something like Bloodletter Aclazotz to win the game on the spot, but I don't see that here. This is a pretty cool looking deck, to be honest. It's definitely annoying to play against, one of my least favorite to play against, just because, again, you got counter spells you got to worry about. You've got removal when they need it, and then on top of that, they're just going to be drawing a bunch of cards when they flash in Curiosity. If Curiosity didn't have flash, I think that would be a fair card, but this card having flash makes it completely busted, because every time I've got a Fairy Mastermind about to attack into me, I'm thinking, oh great, they're going to attack in with 2 flyers now, and they're going to draw 2 cards at flash speed. And if they don't want to, they can hold that mana open to counter something later, and then they can flash in Curiosity when I don't make a spell play, because they, you know, I'm tapped out now, and they're like, okay, let's run out the Curiosity now. And they run it out because it's got flash. So they've always got the options, man. This deck, in my opinion, is really good. Obviously, the win rate not being as high, which is pretty surprising. 53 is not bad. I mean, it's all good win rates, but it's still not what I expected. I thought it'd be a little bit higher. Now, this deck right here, though, I like a little bit more. Like I said, I'm more into the pixie bouncing effects thing right now with the Esper decks. Apparently, you don't see it as much in best of 1, but I'm guessing in best of 3 it's pretty popular right now. But this sort of does the same thing. We want to get down things like Nowhere to Run for removal, bounce it back to our hand with the Fear of Isolation, replay the Nowhere to Run. Same thing with the Otter's talent, or the Storm Chaser's talent. You're going to create Otters over and over again, which are, prowess type creatures get bigger and bigger. So this is a pretty interesting deck. The one card I hate seeing is the Hopeless Nightmare. This card can actually win you a lot of games because if you're attacking over the opponent with little creatures like this, it's kind of hard to get the win. You're just kind of, chipping away at them really slowly. And so you're going to need something to kind of like go over the top. Let's say if you get hit with a sweeper late in the game, like a Sunfall, and you lose your Otter, your Curiosity, whatever it may be. It's pretty easy to just, drop down a Hopeless Nightmare a couple of times, bounce it back to your hand, and then do it again. And it's dealing damage every time it hits the field. You're losing 2 life, which can be very, very crucial. And it has won me some games before in the Esper Pixies build. So I'm sure it could do the same here in Dimir. But it just seems like the opponent's trying to, combine 2 different decks into one, which, typically I wouldn't advise, but in this case, doesn't really matter. I mean, you're just cutting white out, doing the same sort of thing, and, adding in a few extra pieces here that already serve pretty strong purposes in the Dimir mid-range deck. So I like this deck. I think it's pretty cool. In my opinion, I like that one a little bit more than the traditional mid-range deck. But yeah, that's going to be, what is that? Our number 4, I think. Let me see. That was our number 4. Yes. All right, and coming in at number 5, we got a pretty cool deck list here too. Selesnya Rabbits with 4% of the metagame. 56% win rate average. That's pretty good. 75,000 matches, only 28 decks, which means a whole lot of less variance in this deck. This is actually interesting to see. All the other decks had a lot more deck lists to choose from, different variations of those decks. This only has 28 decks with 75,000 matches, which means it's very narrow in how you can build this deck. There's not a whole lot of changes you can make to it. So let's click on the first one here and see what's going on. It looks like, yeah, it's about what I expected to see. Okay, so we've got rabbits obviously as our main synergy here, or our main piece here, because we've got things like Paw Patch, which can become, offspring and create a token of itself. The whole idea is to go extremely wide here for things like the Mentor, which gets bigger and its size is based on how many creatures you have. So you want to have obviously a big wide scaled board. And this is interesting. I've actually not thought about this before, but I have been seeing this lately. The Knight of Errant of Eos. This card is really cool for deck lists like this one, where you typically want to try to, always have some sort of card advantage in any sort of build. Almost every build has some form of card advantage. Heck, even Mono Red has Emberheart, I believe, is the 2/2 mouse, where if you target it, it gives you cards from exile that you can cast. There's some way to generate value and get more cards, right? And so this version of tokens, it generates those cards off of the Knight. So you get a big wide scaled board out, and then you drop down a Knight. You refill your whole hand just as an insurance policy in case the opponent sweeps the board. And then if they don't, you win the game. If they do, you reload the board again. So this card right here is really sweet. It convokes. It needs a lot of creatures to get your, value out of it, which is why we run things like Hop to It. You want to drop 3 tokens down onto the battlefield. You got the Evangelist, which drops 2 things on the battlefield. We're constantly dropping tokens on the field. And then, they get pumped up by things like the Valley Quest Caller, which gives everything a +1/1 if you're a rat. If you're a rabbit, not a rat, a rabbit, bird, all those good things. And then the Arch. The Archer is pretty cool. I'm in love with this card. This is actually one of my favorite cards from Bloomborough, but it almost dies the moment it hits the field every time I've ever cast it. And it's because it's a very dangerous card. If this stays on the field and pumps up, let's say, a Paw Patch recruit on turn 2, after it attacks in on turn 3, it starts running away with games quickly, because on turn 3, the curve is you drop down a Hop to It, you get 3 1/1 rabbits, attack in with the Archer, and now they're all 2/2s. I mean, it's just disgusting. It's really, really good. But I can get why there's only 2 in here. It's legendary for 1. You don't want to get legendary ruled. And on top of that, it's just one of those cards that only gets value after it really attacks in, which means it's kind of a sitting duck for a full turn, which is why I'm guessing they only have 2. And then War Leader, obviously super good, pumps the whole field or creates more rabbits for you. And then Season of Burrow is just really good too for removal. It can exile any permanent you want. It forces card draw, but for exiling things like Liliana or whatever, some permanents that are hard to deal with, it's not bad. And it also creates more rabbits. So I like this deck. I think this deck is very cool. This is something we've played on the channel twice now. I haven't played a night version of it yet, but I would like to. But yeah, it's a deck that's been around for a while. I'm surprised it's still doing as well as it is. And yeah, it's really got a decent win rate too, which is kind of crazy. I get it though. I mean, the go wide strategy is very hard to deal with. As you've seen from our top 5 in the whole meta game, you don't see a lot of sweepers. You don't see any sweepers. You start to fall into like more control. You're going to start seeing a lot less of that. And so these are pretty safe plays right now in the standard metagame, you know, clearly with the fact that, you know, our top 5 already have no sweepers. We don't even see sweepers until we get down to Orzhov combo, which we'll talk about in a second. Just as a what do we call it? Honorable mention, because I only wanted to do the top 5 today because mono black discard is the same as mono black midrange with obviously just more discarding effects. Not that big of a change. And then Rakdos aggro is basically mono red aggro with the flinging effect. It's only Rakdos because it adds in, you know, the one ability to fling your creature to the opponent's face. But Orzhov combo is the exception here. It's the only other deck list here that's not in the top 5 that is a little bit different. This one though, I wouldn't advise it. I mean, win rates, whoops, that's not, okay. Win rates, I clicked on an ad on accident. Win rates are at 48%. Obviously not very good. That's the average. And if you go down here, you'll see all the win rates. They're not super great. And they all seem to be doing one of two things. We're trying to either combo out with the one-shot life gain mechanic off of the Bloodthirsty Conqueror, which is pretty easy to shut down if you know the opponent's running this deck. Obviously taking out the Conqueror, or, you know, taking out, in this case, do they even have the other pieces here? Oh, I guess for them it would have been this this Blight Priest. Oh, and there's the Cleric. Okay, I didn't see the Cleric. The Cleric or the Blight Priest are obviously dealing damage when you gain life, yada yada. So you want to shut down these 3 creatures. If you know that and you know what you're targeting, you shut those down. They can't really do much to win the game. So it's kind of a very narrow way to win, which is why I can see why it's not doing so great. But there is another version of Orzhov combo right now too, where it's, in my personal opinion, a little bit more fun and probably wins more. Yeah, look, we got a better win right here. But it is a raise the pass deck. To me personally, these are harder to deal with because you fill up the graveyard, you raise the past, you deal damage with your Cleric, and then if you by some chance get swept, you do it again, unless it's a Sunfall, of course. And it's really hard to deal with because even if you have a Sunfall, this version runs this Bartolome, which can sack all of your creatures to the graveyard to save them from being exiled, and then you can just raise the past again. This deck is very cool. When it first popped up, it got really popular, and it kind of fell off there a little bit, but I still think this deck is very, very cool in what it tries to do, and in my opinion, it's pretty good. Whenever I play it, it's pretty solid. You run into some graveyard hate decks though, and you're kind of cooked, but other than that, it's a pretty solid strategy. So, all right, well, that is all the top 5 there for you guys. But I just wanted to say, you know, before we get out of here, that I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it gave you some insight. And again, this was probably just more so for newer players, I'm guessing. A lot of you guys already know a lot of this information, but it's basically my takes on all these deck lists and what I'm thinking right now of what's going on in the meta game. Currently, I like the meta game. I know in best of 1, it may seem a little bit more like it's really heavy aggro, whatever, you know, with the Boros, the red, the Rakdos, all these aggro decks. But that's always going to be best of 1. Best of 1's always going to, you know, favor those aggro sort of builds. But I do feel like the metagame is very diverse right now, and it's really interesting. And we didn't even get over here to the, you know, latest mythic players. These mythic players, if you really look, they're not really running any of these top 5 builds here that are being ran the most. They've all got some sort of like creative builds going on over here. And I actually saw this earlier and I got super excited because I see Firewater here, which I think is one of our, I definitely have a viewer named Firewater. That's not, there's no like guessing there. We for sure have a Firewater. I don't remember if their name is Firewater actually on the Arena client, but I think it is. And I think this is one of our viewers. He's absolutely crushing it right now, it looks like, with a Boros burn deck. So it looks like a lot of burn going on here. Urbrask's Forge with the Caretaker's Talent. See, like, this is very interesting. Like, this is not anything meta whatsoever, but we're sitting at, you know, very high 68% win rate on this thing, 70 and 33. Like, that's amazing. And we went from platinum all the way up to mythic. What are we? Mythic number Did it say? I think I missed it. It might be on the screen. I don't even see it. But anyways, we're up in the mythic numbers. I think top 1500. Looking really good though. But if you look at all of these builds, you know, from these individual players, they're all really different. They're not really playing the standard textbook, you know, mono red, mono black mid range. Like some of them are, but I'm sure if you click on them, they're gonna look a little bit different. I looked at this Dimir deck already too, and it's the bounce version I was talking about, where you bounce back your enchantments. So the metagame's actually more open than you might think. So take that for what you will. You know, be creative, come up with some cool ideas. If not, you don't have the wild cards. If you're new to the game, this list is actually really good for you. This top 5 list is really good for you to kind of, you know, craft, copy, get started on the Arena client, and just get learning the game and, you know, figure your way out from there. But I hope this was helpful and insightful to all of you guys, and appreciate you for being here. If you're still here, I really appreciate you watching all the way to the very end. It means a lot to me, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. We'll be back again hopefully next week as well with some more Swayze Talks Magic. By next week, we might have some spoilers. I'm not sure. For Aether Drift, so we might be looking at that. I'm not positive, but again, this might seem a little strange if you're not a member, because you might be seeing these a little bit later. But hopefully, if you're seeing this on time, again, we might have Aether Drift next week. So thank you guys so much. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys tomorrow with probably another Brawl deck as well. So tune in for that, and I will see you then. Until then, guys, peace out. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Hit him 3 times like a hat trick. The name is Swayze, no Patrick. If you play him, then it's tragic. Hit him with the mythic, yeah, that's magic. MTG, that's what you'll see if you like and subscribe. Where's the upload, man? Man, all of the time. Coming with the best decks, this is the meta. This ain't cheap, yeah.